So we've closed the original file, and now we're ready to work on this file and continue on. So let's turn on the retro shape guide. We're going to turn off this ship for a moment and draw a shape with the pen tool. I'll start with, make sure it's a shape. This is good. It doesn't matter what color I'm doing right now, as a matter of fact, because I will edit this a little bit later. So we'll draw some shapes from A to B, creating handles. And closed. Great. In terms of color, we can just plug in kind of a light cyan, a little bit lighter maybe. There we go. And reduce the opacity down to 40%. Nice. I can turn off this guide here, and let's turn on the ship. Now the ship is actually sitting behind that shape, so I'm going to raise the ship up, and now it looks right. It doesn't look quite right yet because actually there's something else that needs to go on here. Let's go turn on the star guide layer. And in fact, just to really show you this, sorry, I jumped ahead. We need the Polygon tool, and we want it to have 11 sides, and we also want it to be set with star and to be indented by 50%. There we go. Now the important thing here is that we subtract the shape we're about to make from this big blue shape. But there's a problem that I think Adobe still needs to address, and that is when I choose this, I think what it's going to do is to invert what is selected here. So let's see what happens. Didn't do it that time. Okay. Adobe still confuses me sometimes. But so here's what happens. Look at our cursor. It's got the minus sign on it. So what happens is I'm going to click and drag starting in the center and drag it out. And it's going to pull this star out. And I want the tips of the star to touch that circle. And that cuts into the big blue shape. Okay, so let me deselect a few things. Let's turn off the star guide, and I'll deselect the shape itself. And now you can actually see into it. Now we can reduce it to 40%, and this is where we want it to be. Right there. Okay. Now, the next thing is, now we want to do the pattern, and that's the custom shape tool we were talking about earlier. And for this one, I'm going to make sure my settings are good. Yes. What we want to do here is create a new layer where this can go, and I'm going to put this back behind Retro Shape Guide. So we'll do a new layer there, and we'll call this Pattern. Did I spell that right? Pattern. Good. And we got to make sure that our shape is set to pixels. Obviously, shape is based on vectors, so is path. But pixels, whenever I draw this thing, here's an example. It looks like it might be a vector, which is actually what this is deep down in the bowels of Photoshop. But this is, by the time it prints on the screen, these are actually pixels. Now I'm going to go back up a little bit here and change this to white. I'll just flip that over. And I'm just going to draw a few of these things, like 4 or 5 of them. I'm going to hold down the Shift key as well because I want this stuff to be proportional. So we'll do one like about here. Maybe one up here, little one maybe. Like that. Let's turn on the ship. That looks pretty good. Nice. The next part we're going to do is to add grass clumps. Now we're going to use the pattern up here for the custom shapes, and there's our little pattern there of grass clump. But this time we'll actually do this as a shape, and we'll actually give it a color here. How about kind of a dark green? What does the book say? The book says dark yellow green, which is that one? Yes. And then for the stroke color, we will do is it dark pea green? I've lost my colors. Dark yellow green, that's the one. Okay, and we will set the stroke for 0.75. Okay, and we will lay down, we're going to be creating our own layer here, so I don't have to worry about this. So I'll put this one in the middle here, and it creates its own layer. And we'll do a few more of these here and there. So I've done a few of those. Now the book gets this a little bit wrong here. It wants us to select a bunch of these things. So I'll select from shape 2 to shape 6. So that's 5 layers. And it says to use distribute widths. And I think this might be a bug in Photoshop right now, because there's no way to select that particular dimmed out item, distribute widths. I think what they want to do is show you something akin to what we've done with the move tool. So I'll select the move tool and I will distribute the horizontal centers. So it just evens out. So we'll click this right over here, and they're now even, which is kind of fun. Okay, let's reduce the opacity on this down to about 60%. And I think we're going to take these grass layers and drag them down a little bit. So now they're kind of behind the shapes right there. Now we've got 2 more things to do. We need to put a title in here. And what happens is that we can import some files. Now there's 2 ways of placing an imported file, and Photoshop is starting to take its cue from Illustrator. Usually when you bring things into Photoshop, all these layers get brought in and they're embedded in the file. The way Illustrator works is you bring in a file and it looks like it's in the file, but it's really just linked in there. So that keeps the file sizes small. For our money right here over here, we're going to do place embedded. And we're going to go find our working title. And it asks us, do we want RetroToyz? And the answer is yes. And now it should be waiting for me to draw. Oh, actually, here it is. It's kind of slow right now. There it is. And I'm just going to move this up and out of the way. And it wants to bring in, at this point, it's a vector-based shape, and that's okay. And since it's a vector-based shape, I can actually scale this up. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to keep this proportional, and I'm going to make this roughly this big. Now it's hiding behind those shapes. We'll fix that in a minute. I'm going to confirm this. There it is. And I'll drag this to the top of the stack. Okay, so now we can see through that stuff. Great. Okay, now what we're going to do is something similar to what we did with the star shape that's over there. First of all, we're going to add what's called a vector mask. It's very much like a layer mask. You guys should be very familiar with layer mask by now. But it uses vectors to do the revealing and the hiding. So we're going to set this for reveal all. Okay, so it shows up and it looks a lot like a layer mask. And then we're going to go back to the Polygon tool, and we're going to keep the same items there. Okay, I've got my vector mask ready. I've got my Polygon tool ready. It's set to black, by the way. And I'm subtracting. And I will go in here, put my crosshairs right in the center of the O, and try to reach the edge. There we go. Now we've cut out part of that O. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And it does the same thing in both places. That looks great. Last thing we want to do is we're going to put a copyright notice in here. So, and I'm going to change what the book says. It takes you through this process where you can rotate the entire image just to, you wind up rotating the type. And let me just demonstrate. Here's the rotate tool. And all I'm going to do is just click and drag, and it rotates the entire image around. And that's all fun and dandy and stuff. But it's kind of unnecessary. So I'm going to set this back to 0 and leave it at that. We're just going to use the type tool. Then we'll rotate the type. So I'm going to start over here. And let's see, we want Myriad Pro. I believe we want 10. And we'll do something like, you should put in your own name here, but for me, I'll obviously put in my name, Scott Boyer. Copyright. Actually, it's Scott Boyer Productions. Copyright 2014. Like that. Actually, just tell Photoshop we're done there. And I will hit rotate. And I'll rotate this around 90 degrees. And push this over here. I believe I don't want black. I think I want white. So I'm going to tell Photoshop I'm done. And then change this to white. And that's the end.